The majority of what you're going to do over the next couple of months in your business is going to fail. What do you think about that when you hear me say that? Failure is just part of what we do. It's what we take away from that failure that determines the success that we have moving forward. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's episode. All right, here we are back. It's episode number 38, the Content Amplification Podcast. Jody, today's show is not about positivity. However, it might be a little bit. What are we going to talk about?
Yes.
What are we talking about today?
Today, through inspiration of the technical difficulties that I've faced today, is about failure.
Failure. There's been a lot of failure over the years
Yes.
In business.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure our listeners have failed once, at least once. And if you've only failed once or never failed at all, you're not doing it hard enough.
Exactly.
At least that's what I've experienced. So that's what we want to talk about today is the importance of failure in business and what can you learn from it. I personally think you shouldn't try to avoid it, but you also shouldn't be seeking out failure.
Yes.
I think you need to embrace it when it happens and figure out ways to learn from it and become stronger on the other side, right? We don't want to throw out too many cliches in the show, but in essence, that is what it is, right? It is a lesson.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to get my my one cliche for the show out, I've heard many times the quote, and it's always kind of resonated with me is, if you're not failing, then you're probably not succeeding either. Right? Because when you look at anything that's worthwhile in life, you have to take a couple steps and, make a couple mistakes to get there and get to the point where, you do consider it success. Otherwise, it's not really a very ambitious goal.
Absolutely. And I truly believe that, success for everyone is different. So if you took on an adventure and it failed, that could be looked at as a success, right? It wasn't right for you. You may have taken things from that you can use for, another venture that's going to take you further, right? So there could be successful elements of that. It doesn't have to be, completely negative.
Exactly. Yeah. And my kind of purpose of this podcast and what I want people to take away, because I don't think it's a very common outlook on failure, is that kind of idea that there's different types of failure, right? So, the first one, which is probably the one that people really only focus on, is the preventable failures. So that's actually human error. That's when, say in our business, we make a mistake that could have been avoided. And then there's obviously the unavoidable failure. So that's things like, with COVID-19, it's not like businesses could have foreseen this or anything. Their sales were bound to dip for a little bit for in most cases. But then there's also something that a lot of people will probably think is an oxymoron, but it's actually called intellectual failures. And what that means is essentially you took a risk, it didn't work out, but you've gained something from it. So in the same way that you gain revenue in your successful endeavors, in failing, you've gained data and information and intelligence to do it better next time and eventually have it be better than it ever could have been.
Absolutely. And I mean, an experience of that or one that I see multiple times over, probably the last 20 years of doing business, has been that a business owner has an idea and they're like, this idea is going to be fantastic. It's going to be the best thing. I'm going to become rich and all this kind of stuff. And they devote so much time and energy in like building out this idea from all the marketing assets and all this kind of stuff. And it takes them, sometimes a couple of years to do so. And then they go and they launch it and it's crickets. Like it doesn't succeed. And they're like, this is a failure. Well, they could have learned that maybe it wouldn't have been, or they went from what they perceived it as being a success when they could have done a minimal viable product and tested it and seen, what can I do at the bare minimum to see if the market is there for it.
Yeah.
And then if it's there, then you can expand upon it. And that's really a kind of a great lesson to learn from that is, you're spending too much time seeking that perfection because you think this is going to be a success. But in reality, it's our clients and the market that determines whether it's going to succeed or not, because they're the ones that need to buy that product or service.
Exactly. Yeah. And, business is completely a trial and error situation, specifically marketing as well. Like that was one of my personal challenges in going down this career path because I'm very much a perfectionist. I want everything to be perfect. I want my plans to work out. I want to be successful, right? As most people would be. So it was really challenging for me to shift that mindset into, as opposed to, failing and, being down on yourself and losing confidence, into, okay, this is one step towards the ultimate goal, right? And
Hmm.
I think a lot of clients get confused with that and get discouraged when, if you take something like Facebook advertising, which we all know is a pain in the butt, and really, really
I've failed
challenging.
many times at that.
Yeah, and really challenging to get right. And I think we can pretty much say with confidence that you're not going to get it spot on the first time. There's trial and error that needs to go into that to gather the information to be successful.
Absolutely. And in marketing any business, and I'm going to talk on the marketing side, or even from running in the business, there's so much change happening that you know you try something, it doesn't work out as you ideally would hope it would, and you may say, okay, I'm gonna do a reiteration of this, but the goalpost is always moving, right? There's always new stuff out there. People are evolving, your clients are evolving. So being okay with always kind of striving for that, and just kind of shortening the amount of failure elements that you might think, and try to think ahead of it, is where we really have to go. And we talked about Facebook ads just a moment ago. That is the biggest change. That's always changing their policies. And even though we spend so much time learning from what we're doing, next month what we're doing now may not work. So I mean, there's going to always be an element of failure in what you do.
Exactly. And, like I've said many times before, marketing, working in marketing makes you a forever student. And,
Hmm.
every risk that you take, and you really do have to be, you can't be afraid of risk when you're running a business or, trying to market that business, because if you don't take a risk, you're not going to be successful. And, risk is a word that can certainly be very closely related to failure, right?
Hmm. And this is going to bring it to a point that I've had for a couple of years now. And I think the way that, and you can be against this thought process at all, and that's perfectly fine. But I think the way that the schooling system has changed over the last, 10, 5 years or whatever, where we're trying to set children up for protecting them from failure, right? That everybody gets a trophy, everybody gets a participation award, everybody gets picked equally. We're creating a future society where they don't have the resilience, the capabilities, the coping mechanisms to deal with failure. And that was one of the biggest things when looking at what does failure do to you as a human being, is it builds resilience, it builds that ability to keep going, the motivation. Whereas if you tried something and it worked 100%, you'd be like, this is easy, and then you're going to get complacent, and you're not going to really strive a little bit further to improve upon it. Whereas if it didn't go as well, or you failed, you should, in most cases, be motivated to be like, how can I fix it, how can I go the next step further? Some people might not be as resilient, and they might be, like, give up, which that's fine. But for a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, they strive off of that, always trying to improve mentality. And I was looking online before this episode to try to find some proof behind this. And there was actually a study done at Northwestern University, the School of Management. And what they did was they looked at a group of medical students who applied for funding for the research. And the ones that got the money, they put them in a success group. And the ones that didn't, they got them in a failure group. And that's how they determined that. So they then followed them later on, and they found that the group in the failure group were 6.1% more likely to publish a high impact paper than those in the success group later on, because the success group was like, this is easy, and they weren't motivated to go any further. It was that kind of like getting 100 on the first test of the year. You set that bar and you're like, well, I'm awesome, right? And I'm not going to really strive for it. But that's the kind of thing I know personally. That's how I have always over the years looked at things that failed. And I know a lot of other business owners that I personally know, where they have had a lot of failed opportunities. They're so motivated, and you look at those people that come to the media and they're like, wow, like the Elon Musks, the Bill Gates, the Steve Jobs, like the people that you're like, wow, they're so successful. Like they've had a million failures prior to what you're seeing,
Yes.
right? And it's just something that's out there.
Absolutely. And while I certainly agree that it builds character and it can build resiliency, I think there's also a fine line, right? Because, along with the studies saying that, failures can actually make you more successful in the long run, which is absolutely true. There's also studies showing how negatively children in school can be impacted by being told that they failed a test or, that they failed this course. um, and a lot of that has to do with the negativity surrounding the word. I think it's
Hmm.
not so much about um, the participation medals and stuff, that it gets a little goofy, but I
Hmm.
think it's about changing the perception of the word failure. I think it needs to be turned into a word that just means you didn't succeed this time, instead of, you're a failure, you suck at this, you don't provide any value, you're not good enough for this. And I think that's where the real problem lies, even if you translate that to business, right? If you
Hmm.
fail at something and you're so focused on the fact that it is considered a failure, you are actually more likely to fail in the future because you have that mindset.
It's an interesting perspective, and you look at how they report on younger children in their report cards. It's needs improvement, right? Words like that.
Mhm.
Whereas once you get older and you should have developed some coping mechanisms, they get into more of the graded scale of either percentages or 8-letter grades and those type of things, where they're not saying you failed, but they're necessarily, you're looking at it, and a 90% to some people may feel like a failure, or they didn't do as good, whereas a 70% for somebody is like awesome, right?
Mhm.
And it's basically where you position yourself in that scale. So I see both sides of the coin there. And also looking at why is that happening. And this podcast is mainly about business and helping people market themselves better and use that. One of the things that I wanted to look at was, like, why do people normally fail? Well, that's what the episode's about, so we'll use that word. Fail at marketing their business. And I think one of the biggest things when they're starting out or even getting into digital marketing is they're not sure where to even start, right? So they're kind of positioning themselves in different points in the whole marketing ecosystem, and maybe they're in the wrong starting spot,
Mhm.
right? So just kind of getting your compass reset will give you better success that way.
Exactly, and a lot of that does come down to the data and the analytics of it, right? Like, a lot of times people assume marketing is just about the creative and the strategy, but all of that is based off information that is gathered, right?
Hmm.
And, in terms of people being, we've seen client after client where, their brain is just scattered all over the place because there's so many things that they could be doing that they decide to not do anything at all because they don't know where to
Hmm.
start. And, the best advice for that is just to pick somewhere and just start. It doesn't have to be perfect at first. It can be rough and you can fail and figure it out as you go, but you definitely have to start.
Absolutely. There's so much information out there. We call it information overload.
Mhm.
And you're trying to analyze what you should do, when you should do it. Even down to social media. How many times should I post in a week, and this kind of stuff. And you kind of get this like analysis paralysis happening, where you can't move, right? And then you just feel like, okay, I can't do this, and you kind of give up. Um, but one of the things that has been my kind of I don't know, thorn in my side personally in business has been jumping from opportunity to opportunity, right? I'm an ideas kind of person. So in business, I come up with different ideas. I'm like, okay, we're going to go do that, right? And I go do it a little bit, and it doesn't work out. And I'm like, okay, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this one, that type of thing. So that's an issue sometimes with a lot of people. And if you're listening and you resonate with that, you know what I mean. What you don't really fully give it the attention it needs. So it's not the opportunity is a failure. It's just that you haven't fully committed to it,
Mhm.
right? And commitment is another big part of it.
Yeah, and obviously this circles right back to the concept of resiliency. Another cliche. I have to. We all
Oh,
know
here
the
we go.
story of Thomas Edison, and but I'm not sure if everybody knows this quote, which I think it's really funny, honestly. When he was getting interviewed, he had failed over 1,000 times at creating the light bulb, and one interview. Someone asked him, how did it feel to fail 1,000 times before succeeding? And he said, I didn't, or, oh man, now I messed it up. Not as poetic as him. Anyways, he said, I didn't fail 1,000 times. Oh God.
You're failing at
I'm
this. Come
failing at
on.
this, but I'm okay. I'm going to get it this time.
Okay, here we go.
I didn't fail 1,000 times. The light bulb was an invention with 1,000 steps.
Hmm.
So, in terms of looking at marketing strategy, um, you know, through resiliency and failures, it's a step by step process, trial and error, right? Like you're not going to get the result that you want right away. It takes time, and it also takes time to even get the data and information that you need to make educated marketing choices and business decisions. So
Mhm.
it comes back to that resiliency piece.
And there's a lot of different elements that play into whatever you're trying to do, whether you're launching a podcast, or you want to do a YouTube channel, or you're building an online course. There's difficulties or technical issues you may have to come up against. There's mistakes you make. You're human. You're obviously going to make mistakes. There are times when you could be running ads, and you put an extra zero in the budget, or it went to a daily budget on Facebook instead of a lifetime budget, and suddenly you spent an extra $1,000 that you didn't know about, right? You could be like, wow, I totally failed at that, but you made a mistake. Okay, it happens all the time. And obstacles, those are those things that are happening that you really didn't have control of, or even knew it was going to happen there. Like the Facebook update that happened for iOS 14. I mean, that changed a lot of stuff, put people in a lot of financial issues, and even the growth of their business was impacted by it. That was an obstacle.
Mhm.
But being able to look at it and be like, how can we come around that at a different angle, and become better at it? And having a process in place, like an impact assessment. It's like, okay, this is what happened. What could we have done better to position ourselves to prevent this? Or how could we implement something when it does happen to respond faster to it? A lot of people and businesses also have like multiple backup plans. So they're like, if this doesn't work, we're going to shift to this focus and be able to flip that switch a lot
Right.
easier. And in small business, that's a lot more realistic than big business,
Right.
because you can pivot very quickly.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, that really comes down to the whole concept of being able to identify what type of failures they are, like I mentioned earlier, right? So if you're looking at a preventable failure, that solution is going to be, having a conversation with whoever it was who made the mistake. If you're in a position of management, or if it was yourself, just figuring out what went wrong and then put in the measures to prevent it. And, supervise in a way that, and create policies, whatever it might be that the problem is, to prevent it next time, so it does become a a success instead of a failure in that sense. But in terms of like unavoidable failure, it really is
Hmm.
about resiliency again. There's nothing that you could do about it, so just move forward. But when it
Hmm.
comes to intellectual failures, it's about dwelling on it, which I think is kind of funny because, everybody always says, oh, don't dwell on it, just move forward. And, sure, that may make sense for the first two types of failures. But when it comes to an intellectual failure, you want to dwell on it. You want to think about it and think about it and think about it, and then figure out what went wrong. What can you do better next time? Why did it fail? You want to analyze it until you know every single detail, and have a plan moving forward.
Absolutely. And as we near the end of this episode, I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to also answer a version of it too. So you've been doing a lot of work with clients on social media. What do you see as a very common failure that people are most likely making when doing their social media for their business?
Hmm. Is it bad that like 10 things came to mind?
That's right.
No, it's in terms of failure, I would say just very simply the strategy they're taking in the sense of being so clean cut with social media and not showing any personality, because while they say that they're being professional and sticking to their business identity, it really is just boring, and people aren't interested in it. And they're
Hmm.
not showing their business personality, because anybody who works for a business is part of that personality, and you're not telling me they're that boring, right? So I think just lacking the overall liveliness, I guess, of their social media is probably the biggest failure I see.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if a funeral home could make their social media engaging and entertaining, and I guarantee there are funeral homes out there that have a personality behind their marketing, than any business could. And I'm pretty sure it exists. I'm sure we just have to look for it.
Exactly.
Now, I'm going to give kind of my thoughts on another side, and what I'm more or less working with clients has been, in launching concepts and projects. So whether it's a podcast or a course or anything like this, and I think it's somebody's neglect to actually look at where is our white flag moment. And what I mean by that is if you're launching a podcast, you have to look at not just, hey, this is what I want it to be, but how much time are we going to let it go before we realize, okay, it's not doing what we want it to do, right? So you look at most episodes, you're in the 50 to 60 to 70 episodes of a podcast before it starts to gain some actual traction, and you'll start to get that engagement that's there. They launching a course, and it's like, okay, well, how many people do we have to enroll through this before we realize that, okay, this is a success or this is a failure, right? So that white flag moment is, where is that line in the sand where we say, okay, these are what we're going to evaluate this on, and if it doesn't match that, we'll raise that white flag. We'll we'll admit defeat, and we'll move on, and we'll learn from everything that we did. And I think people just give up too fast, right?
Hmm.
You're basing success these days on 10 or 5% of what you see online of all the success stories, not the 95% of failure stories that are happening out there, or how long it took them to get there, right? The thousands of attempts to get that product the way it was.
Hmm.
And I think that's what it is we're impatient, right? We want that overnight success, that viral video that you know and a funny story behind that is I used to have do a lot of video production early on in the marketing side, and I'd have people calling me asking, hey, can you produce me a viral video, right? And I found that funny because it's not the video that is it's just how it's picked up. And real viral videos and viral content, you can't really architect that very well, right? It just has to grab hold,
Yeah.
to work.
Yeah.
So that's my advice, is just look for that evaluation moment in the future and say, okay, this is what we're going to evaluate this on, right? It could be the amount of time spent, revenue. It could be multiple factors. I
Yeah.
mean, we don't do a podcast to make money off it. We do a podcast to share knowledge
Hmm.
and help people, and realizing that, if we can help one person achieve something or learn from it, that to us is success. I mean, we could do this for years,
Hmm.
never get a client off of this podcast. I'm never going to consider that a failure, right?
Hmm.
It keeps us thinking about what's current, what can we share, what we do that, which then feeds over to the work we do with our clients anyway. So, um, it's just,
Yeah.
what is failure to you,
Right. Exactly.
right?
Now I have one question for you too, because I came across an article that was talking about failure enthusiasts.
Okay.
So they shared similar opinions to you in the sense that, failure shouldn't be avoided in, children's lives. There shouldn't be no such thing as that, and shelter them as much, because, you know, failure is what develops character. So I guess my question is, are you a failure enthusiast?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I'm noticing this early on in my son is, if we try to play something, he always says he has to win, right? If there's any chance that he's losing, he completely shuts down and like doesn't want to do it anymore. So I'm trying to get that across that I'm like, there are times in life where you're not going to win, bud. Like it's just the way it is, and you just get up, and the next time you just strive to be better at it, and improve. And that's, I think, what you need to look at is you're going to get knocked down. Here's my cliche, right? You're going to
Okay.
get knocked down, but it's just how fast can you get up and keep going, right?
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to end it. Nice cliche.